I'm Charles Stanhope. I'm on the board here at the library, and we have many other board members with us this evening, distinguished delegations. And I'm not going to try to name them all, but thank you all for coming. Thank you for your response to this evening and helping us all feel really good about the programming at the library over the years, and especially this summer. So I have a couple of props. So if you haven't yet picked up what's happening this summer, the rack card on your left, those are available on the circulation desk. And this thinner one that's like a bookmark is a new publication, but also listing the upcoming events, because this library is celebrating its 130th birthday this year. Wow. And we're very proud to still be the heartbeat and the living room of the community. And we are welcoming you into our living room again this evening. It means the world to us that you support us. And of course, I wouldn't be a member of the board if I didn't say, and how you support us with your time, talent, and treasure. And July is a big month for the library, for the town. Flamingo Festival will happen, and we will have our book sale. And this year, giving you all fair warning, the Legion Hall has been sold, and it isn't available for our book sale. So plans are underway for us all to enjoy the book sale right here in the library. So we're going to need lots of folks who can move boxes and unpack boxes and restack tables and all of that kind of stuff for the weekend of the 11th, 12th, and 13th. 11th, 12th, and 13th. And another dimension underway, we're delighted to be able to welcome the author Richard Russo. We've been screening Empire Falls in 2 episodes here, and we have copies of Empire Falls at a library rate, which of course encourages you to pay more than what we're asking you to pay. But Richard will be with us in the summer, so look online, register for that if you haven't already done so. He's well known. This is quite an amazing read if you haven't read it, and even if you read it a long time ago, it's well worth rereading. And then later in or mid-July, we'll be hosting Thomas Ricks, and this is Thomas Ricks's new book, We Can't Save You. He'll be with us for an evening as well. And we've always brought, and we're happy to continue to bring wonderful authors to this community and to the families and folks, neighbors around us. So watch for those. They're all listed on these 2 brochures that I just held up. And as I say, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Sam Cohen, who's here from Missouri. He's enjoying and looks forward to some more sunny days. He's had a few since he's been here, but he's hoping there'll be a couple more before he has to return. He's going to talk to us about his work and analysis and thesis about banned books. This library has a policy about dealing with books that are come into question, and the Maine Library Association and the American Library Association are actively tracking activities in banned book initiatives across the country, so we know how many there are. And I looked at the numbers yesterday. The latest numbers are only from 2023 that I could find, but we hear so much about these issues, and yet when you come down to how many titles have been challenged, it isn't all that many titles. It's the problematic titles that are repeatedly challenged across the country. So there will be time for questions afterwards. When we get there, I will come around with the microphone so that everybody zooming in can hear questions from the floor, and and Kate will manage the incoming questions that are in the chat from the Zoomers. So without further ado, banning books in America, not a how-to. Welcome, great to have you.
Thank you. You're in.
There's a box here that says a user named my mother's name is requesting remote control of my computer. Perfect. It's really funny.
Wow.
Hi, Mom. Hi, also you guys. Thank you for coming. Charles asked me before when we were standing out here if I'd ever been here before to the library. And I said that I've been coming here every summer since 79, 80, something like that. So I've been here. It makes it extra nice to be talking up here today. My wife and I brought our kids here when they were little and not so little, and now. So it's great to be here, especially for the summer of the 130th anniversary, which is a big deal at any time, but I think especially a big deal in the current climate. The climate for books particularly, but for the country more broadly. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Can you hear me? I forgot to ask. You cannot hear me.
Speak a little bit.
Button will not get close.
Go ahead and stop.
Testing. Belatedly. All right. I'll try to speak up. See how this goes. So about the climate. The administration currently occupying the White House has spent its first few months in office attacking the foundations of our society. It has been unlawfully withdrawing funding from and restricting the work of agencies and institutions that help keep people fed, healthy, educated, safe, and protected from discrimination. Members and state officials of this administration's party have spent the past few years attacking these same agencies and institutions, from the Department of Education to their local public libraries and schools. These attacks include attempts to control access to books. This is the climate we live in now. The scenes of mass firings, of kidnappings, of American soldiers deployed on American streets are terrifying and enraging, and so are the scenes of school board meetings and legislative sessions in which citizens and lawmakers attempt to strip the rights to free expression and inquiry from those who need them most. Rubber bullets and book bans are weapons deployed against all of us. Our rights to due process, to fair treatment, to representative democracy, to the freedom to read and write what we want are at stake. So I have a book coming out in a few months, late February. Just got mailed a new title today. I mean, a new cover today. It's better, but we like this cover. And what it's about is what's at stake in book banning. I put up the table of contents here, not as a sales tool, although I'm realizing now it feels that way. Some of the pieces are written by writers who have had or might have had books challenged. This first essay by novelist Lydia Millett starts with the story of a friend, me actually, frantically emailing her to tell her that I thought one of her books was banned in Missouri. Sadly, it turns out that was not the case. The novel is a children's Bible. I don't know if people have read it. I recommend it highly. And it turns out there was an actual children's Bible banned in Missouri, an illustrated version that had a naked person. So she was very disappointed. But that first section has writers talking about being banned and what it means, or being challenged, as we'll discuss. The book also has essays by people who work in the field, people who work at PEN America, the writers organization, the former head of the American Library Association, Emily Drabinsky, activists. Emily Harris is from Iowa and started a foundation to fight bans there. And the third section has essays by professors who have come by their thoughts about banning through their work. My essay, with the helpful arrow here, a banned books course syllabus with historical notes, unfortunate puns, and books, lots of books, is the title. And it takes the syllabus from the course that I teach on banned books. And see if I can make this work. Nope. I remember what I was going to say anyway. It expands it sort of ludicrously with lots of asides and footnotes and puns as a way to talk about what I teach in the class, a space to talk about what's at stake in book banning. And here's from the actual syllabus, just for your interest, the books that I teach, the little capsules where my office is in case anyone wants to drop in.
Right over.
And I teach it because it's a way for me to assign books that some people have decided other people shouldn't get to read. But also as a way to think about the larger political and historical issues about censorship, freedom, identity, discrimination that are sort of parts of this phenomenon. I also hope it'll help students just, feel the wonder and joy of reading what I think are great books. And my hope for the course as a whole and the book is that they'll provide useful arguments, not always agreeing, but useful arguments about why we should get to read these books. These books in particular, why we should be free to read any books. So, as I do in my class, I'd like to begin with the history of book banning, mostly US, a little bit of world. I do this because it's important for my students, and I think for all of us to understand what's happening, to understand that what's happening isn't a new thing, right? There have been instances of this before, and to see what we can learn from the past and thinking about what's happening today. So here's a quick romp through history. Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of unified China, pictured here, was said to have burned all but one copy of each of the books in his kingdom, and also to have buried alive hundreds of scholars, which only very few of our politicians today would do if they could. Yeah, I wrote this a couple of weeks ago. Ovid wrote Ars Amatoria, The Art of Love, I think 1 AD, and it was exiled in 8 AD after Augustus decided to market himself as a moral defender. And Ovid wrote about it and said he was exiled for Carmen et Error, Carmen being the poem, Art of Love, and error being a personal indiscretion that we won't speculate about. But the official story that Augustus put forth was, this is a dirty poem, a dirty book, which gives us our first example of an action taken against literature for ostensible obscenity, but really for political and other reasons. In 640 AD, Caliph Omar, as the legend goes, burned the library at Alexandria, allegedly saying, if those books are in agreement with the Quran, we have no need of them. And if they are opposed to the Quran, destroy them. Later scholars say this probably was not a thing he said, but it was promoted by religious leaders, thus giving us our first examples of both religion-motivated banning and the manipulation of the truth so often involved in book bans and accounts of them. 800 years or so later, in Florence, Savonarola, a Dominican friar who condemned secularism and championed Christian rule, organized bonfires of the vanities of literature and other things the church deemed sinful, as he was in 1498. Burned, that is, at the stake with all of his writings, giving us our first example of the many ironies that arise in the history of book banning. Not all that long after that, and 70 years after Gutenberg printed the first book, the Bible, thousands of copies of William Tyndale's English translation of the Bible, the first mass-produced English Bible, were also burned, as was he, but not before being strangled. I don't know why I need to say that. I do think it's worth noting here, maybe just to get away from the violence, that without Gutenberg's movable type press, the Renaissance, Reformation, and modern information age wouldn't have happened. That it was a Bible that started it all might be, for some people, one of history's greater ironies. For other people, it is not. But it is certainly a testament to the power of the printed word. Thomas Morton's 1637 New English Canon was likely the first book banned in the US. It was banned because it was a celebration of the culture of the natives and the natural endowments of the country, and a criticism of the treatment of both at the hands of the Puritans. And it was written by a man who had established an offshoot of Plymouth Colony. Governor William Bradford of the colony saw Morton's people dancing and frisking together with the natives, which the Puritans weren't even allowed to do with themselves. But more importantly, trading with them in competition with the colony. And when he came out with the book, Bradford called the book, quote, an infamous and scurrilous book against many good and chief men of the country, full of lies and slanders. I'm having a technical difficulty, hold on. Lies and slanders, and fraught with profane calumnies against their names and persons and the ways of God, end quote. But the banning was at least as much about the trading. This incident gives us our first domestic example of the intertwining concerns of religion, sex, commerce, and racism. William Pynchon, yes, ancestor of Thomas, if you're interested, was the first to have a book burned on Boston Common, a pamphlet called The Meritorious Price of Our Redemption. Also critical of the Puritans, puritanical Calvinism in particular. And after a trial that took place in Salem on the same days that was our first witch trial, interestingly, Pynchon avoided having to retract his statements by going back to England. Am I saying Pynchon correctly? Pronunciation. Anybody involved in this? Nobody outside my field of contemporary literature cares about this. He says Pynchon. Oh. Just think about that. Well, so if you want to impress 4 English professors in the country, say, oh, have you read Pynchon? Don't do that. Nearly 200 years after Shakespeare's death in 1807, let me reread that. Nearly 200 years after Shakespeare's death in 1807, because Shakespeare died in Germany, Thomas Bowdler published a family-friendly version of Shakespeare's works that eliminated words, quote, which cannot with propriety be allowed in a family, giving us a name for the act of removing material deemed offensive or improper from a text, Bowdlerizing. Love that word. 1853, Uncle Tom's Cabin was published and became the best-selling novel in the US in the 19th century and the second best book after the Bible. But because of its anti-slavery stance, it was banned in the Confederacy. Nobody tried to ban Darwin's The Origin of Species in the US until the 1920s. So I'm breaking the historical timeline presentation rule here. At the time, plenty of people with fond feelings about the biblical creation story were not so fond of the book. But it took the theories entering high school curricula in the 1920s for Tennessee and other states to ban it. A ban that remained in place in Tennessee until, any guesses? Not last year. No guesses. 1967, which is still amazing. Back to the timeline, 1873, US Postal Inspector and creator of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, which would be a great letterhead to have a copy of. This is what I've written on that. Anthony Comstock convinced Congress to pass the Comstock Act, a law against mailing material deemed obscene, sometimes quite broadly defined, as well as information or drugs related to abortion or contraception, giving us the term Comstockery, which is a great term, and also giving contemporary abortion opponents a possible way to fight the mailing of abortifacients. But anyway, Walt Whitman, an expanded edition of Leaves of Grass, which Whitman first published in 1855, but kept adding to editing. In 1881, an edition was withdrawn in Boston after the DA there threatened criminal prosecution for the use of explicit language. When this edition of the work was later published in Philadelphia, it went through 5 editions of 1,000 copies each, which is a lot. The first of which sold out in a day, giving us our first example of an attempted ban leading to an increase in sales. So I'm going to start a campaign to rename the Streisand effect. Do you know the Streisand effect? Barbara Streisand, big giant coastal California house, some geographical survey with drones, got a picture of it. She found out, was afraid everybody was going to see her giant house. I don't know if it was because of where it was or how giant it was. But she tried to stop them in the courts from putting the photo online. A photo which almost nobody would have seen until she did that. So when you try to suppress something and then it gets out, that's the Streisand effect. But I think we should call it the Whitman effect. Maybe more people will read Whitman. Maybe. Okay, here we go. Another great name. After the creation of the Irish Free State in 1922, a committee on evil literature was appointed, issuing in 1927 the just as wonderfully named Report of the Committee on Evil Literature, which I think I should have called my book. Books could be banned if they were considered to be indecent or obscene, as could newspapers whose content relied too much on crime, as well as works that promoted the unnatural prevention of conception or that advocated for abortion. Another fantastic name, case in 1933, US versus one book called Ulysses, the decision overturned a ban on Joyce's novel that had been in effect since it was excerpted, parts of it were excerpted in the Little Review, a literary journal, and the excerpt included coverage of masturbation, seized by the US Postal Service under, yes. On May 10th, 1933, in most university towns in Germany, nationalist students marched in torchlight parades as part of a self-proclaimed action against the un-German spirit, tossing more than 25,000 un-German books into bonfires. In all, the Nazis burned or otherwise destroyed an estimated 100 million books. Back in the US, it's a picture of Joe McCarthy and no relation, Roy Cohen, at one of his hearings. The Red Scare saw bans of the Communist Manifesto, of course, but lots of other things, including Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, works that were seen to display an un-American spirit, to borrow language we just saw elsewhere. 1954, the Comics Code Authority arose in response to parents' concerns about the explosion of comics and as a result of Senate hearings, constituting the industry's efforts to police itself in order to avoid government intervention. So this is sort of a self-banning action. That was great. In 1955, Lolita was seized by British Customs and banned in France, where it was first published in horribly translated editions. Never banned here. Interesting. Something to think about, but widely criticized. So, in 1957, there was an obscenity trial for Ginsberg's Howl, probably the most famous obscenity trial for books. The bookstore manager was arrested for selling a copy to an undercover police officer. Then City Lights publisher Lawrence Ferlinghetti was arrested. The trial ended with the poem, the book of the poem, unbanned. It was adjudicated to have redeeming social importance, which is a phrase you'll hear. Naked Lunch, 1965. Who has read Naked Lunch? Oh, it's a dirty book. I think that's fair to say that. It's about his drug addiction. There's lots of there's a story about, we saw the movie, my wife, but I won't go to it. Second date, bad. I guess I told the story. Again, writers testified about its literary merit, and it was unbanned. Satanic Verses. Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989 issued a fatwa ordering Muslims to kill author Salman Rushdie following the publication of the Satanic Verses, which the Ayatollah saw as blasphemous. As you can see on the cover, this is the book opens with these two characters, both Indian expats, I think in England. I think they're actors. It's been a long time, but their plane explodes from a bomb from terrorists, and they miraculously survive as they're falling out of the plane. This is a very long scene. They are transformed into the Archangel Gabriel, Jibril, and a devil. And it's not a realist book, right? It's a very magical realist book. And it's much more about the immigrant experience in England than it is about the Quran. But that's not how it was taken. So Rushdie had to go into hiding for almost 10 years and was out, but I think 3 years ago, was attacked at Chautauqua, lost an eye, and has written a book about it. So that's an interesting lesson. This is something I did not know about until teaching this class. In 1992, during the fighting that followed the breaking up of Yugoslavia, the National and University Library of Bosnia and Herzegovina which was huge, in Sarajevo was attacked by Serbian nationalists with incendiary grenades, which they lobbed from across the river, destroying more than 1.5 million books. It was the biggest loss of books in history. Librarians and volunteers targeted by snipers formed a human chain to rescue books as the library burned. Which is quite a story. So, some common threads in this quick history. All things that I think can help us maybe think about what's happening today. The first is that knowledge that can be had from books is often seen by those in power as dangerous. Dangerous enough to get the books, their authors, and those trying to protect them burned, buried, or shot. The danger is often framed as challenges to orthodoxy, whether it's orthodoxy of religion, patriotism, or the social order as understood by those in power. At least in the last century or so, and at least in the West, the censors don't tend to win. Court cases restore access, regimes fall, politicians' careers end in disgrace. So, this is going to be on YouTube today. We were never here. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about what's going on in the US now, holding what we know about the past in our heads while thinking about what's new, in particular about what's going on today. As Charles mentioned, the American Library Association has been a great watchdog and champion and defender of libraries, and has put together a report every year for the last 20 or so years, covering public and school libraries. Some numbers from the last report. 821 demands of book censorship were tracked in 2024, with 2,452 different titles challenged. Here's some stuff in the report. I don't know how easy it is to see it. When it's important, I think when looking at this issue, it's important to recognize the involvement of national advocacy groups in what's happening. Organizations like No Left Turn in Education, subtle. Parents Defending Education, Moms for Liberty. They operate nationally. They provide resources to local parent groups, including lists of books, so they don't have to read them before they challenge them at the school board meetings. No, they really don't, and they don't try to hide that. They'll say, "Thank God, Moms for Liberty sent me this list with this one quote from the Toni Morrison novel, so I don't have to read it myself." And I don't know what's supposed to happen when you read that book, but it's also important to note. Someday I'll know how to do this. Sorry. It's also important to note the links to anti-vaccination and COVID anti-masking activity, anti-Black Lives Matter / critical race theory / 1619 project activity, anti-LGBTQ plus activism. These are often all the same people showing up at the meetings, challenging these things, often attacking books when it comes to books that are on what they perceive to be the wrong side of these issues. Interestingly, also often the same people involved in parental rights, voucher, school choice movements. So you can see some of the numbers here. Here they're looking particularly at decisions that are made by people who have been pressured by these groups. The numbers go way up. The numbers here are shocking. 72% of censorship attempts come from pressure groups initially, not by. It's not grassroots. What's the opposite of grassroots? Anybody? Didn't know you were taking classes. There's going to be a quiz. AstroTurf. So they're made to look like grassroots, but that's really, I didn't make it. Pretend I didn't make them. Along with the ALA, Pan America has also played a role as a watchdog and as a defender. And it's also a really great source of information about book banning. In April 2022, it found that 1,586 book bans targeting 1,145 unique books had occurred in the previous 9 months. And the report on last year's bans, so 2023, 2024, shows even more sobering trends. As you saw on the last slide, over 10,000 instances of book bans, individual challenges, over 4,000 titles, with greater severity of actions taken and with Florida and Iowa in the lead. So 4,000 unique titles, 10,000 instances. The more severe bans means instead of just being like put on a bookshelf behind the librarian, so you have to ask for it, they've been taken out of the building entirely. Florida and Iowa, number 1 and number 2. An alarming percentage of all the titles. But it's not just happening there. As I say, as a proud Missourian. The latest report also notes just what it is that continues to get a book bound. So as opposed to the portion of books, the total portion of books published that are about these things, the books that are challenged are overwhelmingly overrepresented as books with people and characters of color, books with LGBTQ plus people and characters. 44% and 39%. Over half of them discuss sex in some way. And interestingly, nearly 6% are YA books, young adult books. I think I'm in the way. Which deal with sensitive topics that young adults are going through and might benefit from being able to read about. It's also important to look at legislation. I'm going to do that for a few minutes. Here's a 2024 map made in 2024 of legislation from 2021 through much of 2023 nationally. Certain geographical patterns emerge, but it's not just the Deep South, it's also the Southern Midwest and the Strip and the Mountain States. But it's also trying to be almost everywhere, including me. So that's fun. PEN America has previously documented the introduction and spread of something they call educational gag orders, which is a set of bills that had explicit prohibitions on materials and content that could be taught in classrooms. But since 2023, they've been tracking what they call educational intimidation bills, which are a little different. Rather than explicitly banning words and concepts, the provisions of the second kind of bill are intended to put pressure on teachers, librarians, and students without imposing direct prohibitions. These bills use intimidation to create a chilling effect by mandating new ways for government, administrators, and members of the public to challenge educational practices, including the assigning and even possession of books. As we can see here, numbers passed are going up. It's not just numbers proposed, it's numbers passed. It's a news story from, I believe, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch from my state. Don't want Florida and Iowa getting all the attention. Perversely. We were number 1 in 2023 for educational intimidation bills proposed. I know they'll show in a second that's partly due to the Missouri legislature, which has a real spaghetti on the wall approach to proposing legislation. 31 bills. So I guess it started in January 2021. All sponsored by Republicans and several labeled as some version of a Parents' Bill of Rights bill. Of the 31, only one passed, but that's all it takes, right? I'll show more about this bill in a second, but the story lists books that were challenged, including Mouse, which I'll return to in a second. People know Mouse, graphic novel about the Holocaust. It was not explicitly banned, but removed as an option. I'm not sure I know the difference. 31 bills. This is just a section of the spreadsheet that PEN America keeps of educational intimidation bills. And I find it really interesting. I don't think everybody does. It shows the sponsor, which if you know the Missouri legislature is interesting. Some of the usual suspects. The summaries show the kinds of things they are trying to ban. Mike Moon's bill, our friend Mike Moon, Students must notify parents within 24 hours if a student expresses changes in their gender identity or sexual orientation, including pronouns. Yeah. And this shows some of the themes or some of the things that they are trying to have happen. I do not know what a la carte means. I want to find out. A little bit closer look at the bill and then we'll move on. Here, the provision of explicit sexual material, which is now a class A misdemeanor, is explained. I particularly enjoy the list of verbs. Knowing of its content and character, such person provides, assigns, supplies, distributes, loans, or coerces acceptance of, or the approval of the providing of explicit sexual material to a student, or possesses with the purpose of providing, assigning, supplying, distributing, loaning, or coercing acceptance of, or the approval of the providing of explicit sexual material to a student. No chilling effect here at all. Here's the definition of explicit sexual material. What was that? Saving our microphone.
Just want to be clear.
Well, here it is. I don't need to read it, I don't think.
Well, it's too small to read from the back.
Or is it? Do I have to-
People on Zoom want to move.
I feel like I'm being trolled. I'll get to the part, the provided however part. So here's all the things that are dirty, that are explicit sexual material. Provided however, that works of art and taken as a whole that have serious artistic significance or works of anthropological significance or materials used in science courses, etc., shall not be deemed to be within the foregoing definition. What's the problem with this? Who decides? Do you want the members of the Missouri legislature deciding? What has serious artistic significance? Have they asked me? They have not. And here, last part of this is the person from 2 slides ago is defined. And again, no chilling effect here. So the person who does these, that list of verbs, person affiliated with a public or private elementary or secondary school in an official capacity, an administrator, teacher, librarian, media center personnel, substitute teacher, teacher's assistant, student teacher, law enforcement officer, school board member, school bus driver, guidance counselor, coach, guest lecturer, guest speaker, or other non-school employee who is invited to present information to students by a teacher, administrator, or other school employee. Students are left out. Phew. So, haven't talked about higher ed much today, and I'm not gonna, because that's a whole nother talk, as we say in English departments. But it's happening there too. It's in the news. I was just talking to somebody before to talk about what is happening with Indiana public universities. It's the latest news, being defunded, programs being closed, and a lot of it's under pressure about DEI, right? So we have a few explicit cases of service academies being told to remove books. I think this has been reversed, this particular one. But it's about time on campus. As historian Ellen Schrecker has argued, things are much worse than they were during the Red Scare for this sort of thing. The chilling effect on curriculum and programming is underreported and really quite great. And I mean that in the large sense, not the, yay, that's good sense. Schools across the country are shuttering centers, changing course names, deleting words from websites. Just this past Friday, James Ryan, people heard about this, president of UVA, stepped down, really unselfishly. He actually did step down, but they were being pressured to just completely eradicate DEI from campus. And he wasn't doing it fast enough for the White House's taste. And it was going to threaten their funding significantly. So he quit. Yeah. So common threads. We're coming to our books here. The word obscenity is doing a lot of work. They're ostensibly about obscenity, a lot of these bans, but they're really much more about other things people are uncomfortable with. Certain kinds of sexuality, acknowledgement of racism, and other forms of bigotry, questioning authority, and certain kinds of patriotism. We got somebody write that down. That's a good one. patriotism, including militarism. In the case of Mouse that I showed a couple slides ago, is instructive here. It was banned for obscenity because of a drawing of the author's mother after she committed suicide in the bathtub, and she was naked, as one is in a bathtub. Spiegelman, the author, said in an interview later that he could not understand how a person could think of that as having prurient interest, right? Yeah. This is not obscene. There's something obscene about it, but not in the way they mean. The obscenity that that book is interested in exploring isn't nudity. So the question then is what actually bothered the people about this book. Second, history repeats itself. As we see from the moment the Puritans make landfall, the reaction of censorship to questioning of authority or orthodoxy repeats itself today. And third, history scares people. Books that are honest and question inherited narratives of American history and ask that attention be paid to the more uncomfortable parts of the past, like slavery and Jim Crow, are highly represented among lists of books challenged. A couple more minutes here. A reminder that it's not just about books, this censorship. It's also words and topics. Apologies for the blurry slide. This is from the National Cancer Institute, and it's advice about publications. They're going to review the ones that have the bad words and the bad topics. My favorite example is cancer moonshot, which was Biden's language, the Biden administration's language for trying to really do something about that. The list of these terms, diversity, equity, efforts, gender, it's not about science, right? It's about the things that the people in charge would rather we don't talk about. Charles already mentioned this to me earlier, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS. It's not, as with universities, I think, it's not just attempts to restrict what these institutions and agencies do, it's attack on them themselves, right? Libraries are the enemy, right? The IMLS, I think most of us were blissfully unaware of a few months ago, maybe most of us still are, no offense.
They were doing good work.
Yeah. So we had an executive order from our president in March, defunding a number of agencies whose funds were provided by Congress and therefore not actually under his jurisdiction. So looking at this, from by the authority vested in me onward, it's lies, right? The authority is not vested in him. It reminds me of Mary McCarthy on Lillian Hellman years and years ago. Anybody remember this line? Every word she writes is a lie. I'm gonna get this wrong, but something like every word she writes is a lie, including and the. He did not have the authority vested in him. Section 2 of the executive order names the agencies, including the IMLS, media, scholars, homelessness, development, financial institutions, minority business, sensing any trends. They had a week to write a memo saying they were going to comply with this order to cut costs, to show how they were going to be in compliance. And here, if there are any legal scholars in the room, and I know there are, excuse me, forgive me, but this is the magic of the savings clause, as I have learned about it, as a literary scholar, which is nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect. And then it says, this thing that we just said we're going to do, we're not doing it.
Yeah.
But they're doing it, right? When I teach this to my students, I end up, it's a bad idea for teaching because what I do is say, look, it's just like this other thing you don't know about. So then I have to teach them about the other thing. But the other thing is the Missouri Constitution. So when Missouri became part of the Union, as part of the Missouri Compromise, the deal was you're not going to write anything into the Constitution that impinges on, that's not the word I mean, affects badly the rights of freedmen from other states, right? So they wrote a constitution that excluded freedmen from the state. And they had to get Henry Clay involved. And he wrote a clause into the act that accepted Missouri into the Union, saying nothing shall be construed in this constitution to restrict the rights of freedom from other states, even though it did. So Sean Valence, the historian, wrote, called this a perverse sentence in this document. It's just, yeah. So in May, in closing, in May, a judge ruled against that executive order that we're just looking at in favor of the state's attorney generals, but there are still complications. I think some funding has been restored to the MLS, but we'll see how it goes. And the rulings keep coming. This past Saturday, the Supreme Court issued a decision by the familiar 6-3 that made it easier for parents to opt out of having their children be taught or asked to read about ideas that they say go against their religious beliefs. Regardless of the reasonable point that this will mean that school districts will no longer be able to mount a coherent curriculum or even teach a single class. Sorry. This will lead directly to the effective banning of books that discuss LGBTQ+ issues and sexuality generally from the classroom. And if anybody had a chance to read that opinion or read about it, it's incredible. It's incredibly bad. What's clear is that this administration and the forces of cultural reaction more generally, some of whom unfortunately are our neighbors, will keep trying, and that they must be fought if we want to hold on to our institutions and our rights. As my father, something of an expert in the courts and the Constitution, said recently of this administration's actions in general, the courts alone can't save us, but maybe the courts and crowds together can. Tracking what's happening regarding our freedom to read and all these other things, and speaking out in defense of it and them together, maybe we can help save them. Thank you.
We do have one question or a point here from Joan Fitzgerald. I hope you'll address the significance of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit Court ruling, May 23rd, 2025, that public library collections were not protected under the Free Speech Amendment because public libraries constitute government speech.
You would like me to address that?
Significant.
Yes, it's very significant, and it's typical of the legislation, which, the decisions, which we have been seeing that find the result they want, regardless of what the law says, would be my short answer.
Can you explain what that decision was?
I didn't think I can.
Yeah.
I could try. The idea is that public libraries aren't protected in terms of freedom of speech. They can't do and say what they want, provide what they want, because the government funds them, so they're government institutions. And they've been doing that with other institutions.
And this gets into our continuing campaign here to explain that although we have public in our name, you are the supporters of this library. Town is only 12% of the whole, 10%, thank you, of our overall annual operating budget. So there's a whole variety of libraries across the country, and especially in Maine and New England, that aren't following the pattern where the library staff and employees are municipal employees. They are not municipal employees. So it'll be interesting. Don't lose that question. Let's follow up for ourselves and learn about that.
And to add one more thing, if I could, to that, the same thing is happening with public universities and public schools, right? Where they're saying we can control what you do, we can control personnel, you can control what you teach because you're a public institution, even if most state universities are down to 10% funded by their actual state legislature.
Yeah, the history was great. How do you explain this in the context of the changing ways that we receive information? As I said, banning the book doesn't necessarily mean the information is banned. I'm assuming that almost any 16, 12, 13-year-old can find whatever they want to find through the internet or through streaming services or whatever. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, one of the essays in the book addresses this, but there are people who say, don't get so excited about it. It's not really a ban. The books, the information is out there. In terms of the actual books themselves, even if they're out there, it's a lot more about access, right? So the typical kid in a small, I don't know if this is the statistically typical kid, but a kid living in a small town, only with the ability to go to the public library or to school to get these books, If the books are removed, they're not gonna go online, they're not gonna go on Amazon, they're not gonna, so restriction of access, I think, is just as important as the total absence of possible access, if that makes sense.
Thank you for this coverage. To what extent are religious groups on either side of this issue?
A great extent. I don't know the details, I think I forgot to mention, well, I mentioned a little, I didn't mention the title of the opt-out case that was just decided. It's Mahmoud versus Taylor. So I believe it's a Muslim group bringing suit.
It was three families in Montgomery County, three different
Right.
religions. I think, Muslim, Christian, and I don't know the third.
Yeah.
Jewish family, I'm not sure.
So it's across religions, and within religions, there's disagreement, right? I think it depends on the degree of orthodoxy in the religion, the degree of tolerance. I don't have the right language to talk about this, I don't think. But you can't say that religious groups are all on one side or the other of the issue.
Utilizing all those numerous criteria for banning books,
Mhm.
has there been an attempt to ban the Bible? Because it has all those.
It is a dirty book.
It is a dirty book. So I think, has anybody held that out as an example of something that should be banned?
Well, as I mentioned in the story about the first essay in the book, at least one edition, a children's illustrated edition, has been banned because of explicit drawings. But even that, there's explicit language, there's sexuality, there's a little bit of violence. And that's one of the things, if you bring up with the wrong person, the conversation stops. But with other people, they say, "Oh, right," because it's an unimpeachable text for most people. You can't say that you can't read that book, right?
Does that apply to Trump's Bible?
Is that a rhetorical question? It's $60. It's bound in leather. I think it's got the Constitution in it as well. Right?
Probably.
Probably think if you
I
can.
don't know if it's a package deal with the gold sneakers.
Be printed with Chinese.
It was toxic.
After what you said about the state of Missouri, some details. And I know something about the state of Indiana. Is there pressure on you about this course?
That's a good question. Not yet. There's a lot of pressure at Mizzou, at university, on DEI. There's some question about whether the College of Arts and Sciences diversity intensive course requirement for graduation is going to be shelved. I'm associate chair of my department, so I'm in charge of the website. This is fascinating, I know. We're under pressure to remove diversity words from the language we use to describe, when 5 years ago, we were all under pressure to put that stuff in, right? The course has been written up in the newspaper, and I won't shut up about it, so it's somewhat encouraging that I haven't received any pushback yet, but
Continued.
Yes.
yes, yeah. No, I mean, one of the really interesting things about the argument that's happening behind the scenes about the diversity intensive course is that it's easy for people like me to say, no, we have to keep this, when there are other people who are saying we have junior professors of color who teach these classes, who have these words in their titles, and they're scared, and it might be nice to force them not to teach those classes. And it's hard for me to say, I don't think that's a good argument, because I'm me and they're them. But yeah. Also, while we're talking about Mizzou, should I know? So only one. the Black Collegians organization has every year for the past many years had a Welcome Black picnic for Black students and friends. They were ordered over last summer to change this fall's title to Welcome Black and Gold, which is our university color. So it's the Welcome Black and Gold.
Oh, meaning everybody.
Yes, all picnics matter.
Anyone else in the room? The only thing I want to say on the Missouri front is, don't forget that Missouri wouldn't have got into the union without Maine. So it's the Maine Missouri Compromise.
Is that what they teach it? Is that how they-
So that's the correct way. Correct way to speak. I'm sure you know that Harriet B. Costeau wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin in Brunswick, Maine.
Oh, right.
Yes, I did.
Good. Just checking credentials.
They just mentioned them.
Is it?
No, I did put that.
No, it isn't going away,
No.
you know, and it's because of these issues that are still focus on that. I am delighted that you all were engaged and stimulated by Sam's conversation with us this evening. We learned a lot. We appreciate you're there in the trenches in higher education, and I hope you will feel. Just a moment, pause.
Just wanted to say, this will be recorded,
Oh.
is re-recorded actually, and will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So flip up Southwest Harbor Public Library and YouTube.
So you can send it off to your friends and neighbors, families,
Congressman.
Yes.
congressmen, and senators, and all your friends and all your friends in Missouri.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing initially your heritage of life and experiences in this library. It means a lot that you have started in a way here and have come back home again. And we know you'll come back every time that you're around us. So one last expression of appreciation and our gratitude to Sam for the program this evening.